Welcome, everyone, to the State of Miami podcast. I'm extremely excited to have the one and only Joe Minicozzi on. Joe was recently recognized as one of the 100 most influential urbanists of all time, and I don't think that's a hyperbolic statement by any means. Joe actually founded his own company called Urban 3 to explain and visualize market dynamics created by tax and land use policies. Joe holds a Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Miami and a Master of Architecture and Urban Design from Harvard. So, this is an incredible honor to have you on the podcast, Joe. Thanks so much. I
Thanks for
also
having
wanted
me.
to say, I also wanted to say that he's extremely involved with the Congress for the New Urbanism, and he's active locally as an activist for these kinds of things. We'll get into his dying wish at the end of the podcast. But once again, just wanted to thank you and kind of start off with your connection to the Miami area and how how you got started with Urban 3 and what your connection is to UM, if you will.
Sure. And also just for the audience at home, and Andres and I were talking about this last week, and
Mhm.
I talk in pictures. I'm a very graphic
Oh yeah.
person, so I call it kind of PowerPoint DJ. We're going to be spinning some hits here with some graphics. For the folks that are listening on audio, I'll try to describe the stuff, but this is all stuff to see. A picture's worth 1,000 words. But let's
Oh
kind of,
yes.
if you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen here. Let's
Please,
see.
please.
For people that are in South Florida, um, there used to be a natural path of northerners to Miami. Now that's kind of a little bit further up in Florida, and now
Mhm.
Miami's getting a lot more people from south of Miami. But Rome, New York is where I grew up. It's on the Erie Canal, or where the Erie Canal started. It's sort of a dying little Rust Belt town. This graphic on the left here is a Chamber of Commerce graphic from my hometown that they don't even have action. They're like, if you see any other action in the state, go visit it and then come see us. So if you're in Albany, why not drive 2 hours to see Rome? It's kind of a weird marketing strategy. But Rome is where the Erie Canal started, as a massive piece of infrastructure. There was, in a lot of American cities, they sing these kind of folk songs. One of them is called the Erie Canal song, that it actually talks about my hometown. The Erie Canal was dredged from Rome in the center point and went east and west from there, and that basically opened up Chicago and all of the Plains states agriculture to go through New York City. So it made Chicago a powerhouse. It's a pretty pivotal piece of infrastructure. And back then, my hometown was actually considered for the state capital. This is a shot of downtown. It's a typical main street, lots of dense buildings and pedestrians and activity. When I was a kid growing up in the 70s, it really wasn't all that great. It was a lot of Rust Belt towns saw a migration of their jobs to the South or to Mexico or wherever. So we had all of these people that had no jobs. It was kind of bizarre to experience. And so the community was like struggling. Like, what do we do? We lost all of our jobs. And somebody came up with this idea of rebuilding Fort Stanwix. Fort Stanwix was a battle of the Revolutionary War. We all know our Revolutionary War history, the pivotal battle of Fort Stanwix.
Mhm.
That's a joke. It wasn't that pivotal, but they're like struggling with, like, we got to do something. And we had this unfortunate, inconvenient truth that the city was built on where the fort was. So when I was a kid, I experienced them knocking all of these Main Street buildings down. Like, we used to drive by and see that. And they eventually built this wooden fort. So, we occasionally get a
Wow.
Canadian tourist, and that's about it. Um, and like, no one showed up. And what was worse is, they not only with the fort, they turned the rest of downtown into an urban renewal area. And
Wow.
about 12 blocks, maybe more, they built a pedestrian mall because everybody's doing that in the 70s. So they basically eliminated the buildings and then built this big open space. They put another open space on the open space. They built a 7-acre plaza or it's a 4-acre plaza on it. A couple of parking garages, because you're going to drive up from Miami to see this wooden fort, right?
No.
A, a, a city hall, a parking lot in front of City Hall, because those parking structures are way too far away at 200 feet away, and a mall across the highway. And then the craziest thing ever was like Le Corbusier meets the Ponte Vecchio. It was like this huge concrete structure that shot out over the bridge, over the river, that was a bridge with stores on it. And they said, after they knocked all the stores out, they're like, please come back and rent from our building over the highway. Um, and this is kind of a pivotal spot for me. This is uh, a corner at Main and Main. What used to be there was my Uncle Joe's pastry shop. My Uncle Joe is an Italian immigrant, or his father was, and they moved in and basically did what immigrants do. You start making businesses, you're doing the American dream.
Oh
He
yeah.
bought this building, he had apartments of it, he started a pastry shop. He paid my mom $300 to name me Joe. That's how I got my name.
Yeah.
Um, and then they took his building through eminent domain. Like, think about that. It's like cities did this, and primarily to the immigrant classes. They're ones that suffered the blows of these large institutional actions. Um, and my Uncle Joe was a real trooper. He was like, he would make birthday cakes to the fort. Like, there he is there with his little hat. And this is how I grew up. I thought this was normal. It's like, whatever. I went to church in this church here. I was, raised Roman Catholic. This is this big sandstone church that was built in the 1800s. Left one of the few pieces of architecture, a beautiful building. And I used to just fall in love with the architecture. And I thought, well, I live in upstate New York with all of this snow. Wouldn't it be cool to go to Miami to go study architecture and go to the beach? And like, that's as far as I thought. By the
Okay.
way, when I showed up at Miami, I had this like perm
Oh
mullet.
yeah.
This is my high school picture. There I am. And I had no idea about Miami culture, but I was like, I'm 100% Italian. There's not a lot of difference between Latin American culture and Italians.
Yeah.
It was like very vocal, hands are in the air, like lots of stuff, food everywhere.
Very similar.
But yeah, but the other thing is like, at the time, Miami Architecture School was transitioning into this sort of an urban design program, and I didn't know. I was just happy to be practicing architecture and drawing buildings. But Liz Plater-Zyberg, who is our connection,
Yeah.
she heavily influenced me on stuff, and Andreas did too. I mean, he used to put us in minivans. I remember like one trip they took us out into Kendall to look at the endless single family housing, and I remember him saying like, you all need to go get a gallon of milk. You have 45 minutes. And we were like architecture students. We're just like wandering around. This is before cell phones and Google Maps and stuff like that. And we're
Yeah.
trying to find a gallon of milk in the endless sprawl of Kendall.
Yeah. Good luck.
And yeah. And at the time, the school was also very vocal about protesting any I-95 expansion, US
Mhm.
one. We would protest US one, sit out there with little signs protesting on it. And really, what it was like 1987, 88. We were clamoring about this kind of environment that was being created that was just inhospitable to humans, and it was kind of like a joke, really. I mean, it's just this kind of sprawl cartoon, but the reality of what Miami was doing was pushing against the machine, saying these are inhumane places for people. um, I was struggling with this because I grew up with a little town that basically eliminated all of these buildings. And I remember conversations with Liz, where she'd say, I'd ask her, I'm like, well, what do I do for my hometown? And it was mind blowing to her that a town would do that kind of scale of urban renewal. There was only 30,000 people in the city. Every city did urban renewal. Miami did. Fort Lauderdale, places did it, but they didn't do it at the scale that my hometown did. And Liz said to me, she goes, that's an economic problem, not an architectural problem. And can you see what we're dealing with here with suburbia in South Florida? And that really drove the point home to me, is like, it's not just design. Design matters immensely. I still consider myself a designer,
Mhm.
but there's something back there in the policy that's making it happen. And the real thing that like drove it home for me, the University of Miami started a Rome program, and we studied architecture in Rome, Italy, a different Rome. And I lived here in Campo de Fiore. I went to school. That
Wow.
we did a co-lease program with University of Washington. So I just literally walked like 50 yards to that building, but I got to eat here. It's like every morning this market would show up, and it's been doing this for thousands of years. And so, how has this community done this for thousands of years? And my Rome is dead as a doornail. And it's all choices. These are all choices that communities make that have consequences. So, this Rome, Italy, has built itself back on itself, but under a certain pattern and a DNA that my city just threw away. We just threw away our DNA and said, okay, we're going to be a different place. So when I talk to people, I have to get them to see this is like, these are choices you're making. We didn't wake up and magically we're suburban. It's like, um, uh, in a Broward County wasn't born that way. That Browning County was created. West Dade County was created, you know. So what are the policies in the running I-95 through Liberty City? That was an act, a violent act to try to wipe out a certain neighborhood. So these are choices and they have consequences.
Hmm.
So what we see is our firm tries to practice with people is try to wake them up a little bit to realize that Moses didn't deliver their city and you do have a DNA. So I'll just
That is
here, well,
that
that's
right
kind of
there is
like
a
my start.
that's exactly what I wanted to touch on next. How economic analysis through geospatial modeling actually enables you through the DNA metaphor that you used about your parents, how we can learn from our parents. We can also, cities, younger cities can learn from older cities. And if you will, I would love for you to talk more about that connection of the DNA of how we got here and what we could learn and move forward um,
Yeah.
regarding all
Well,
these choices that lead us here.
yeah, actually, let's go back to that. That's so back to the DNA for a second. Like
Hmm.
this is how I started my life when I had hair, and this is my path. I'll be my grandfather, whether I like it or not. I'll be Papa, or more importantly, I'll be my dad. And again, when I had hair, but
Yeah.
there's I use this as a metaphor because there's things that we can't choose. You look at your parents or your grandparents. The older you get, the more you start to see these things happen where you're just like, oh my God, I'm becoming my father. You know, it's like I've got
Yeah.
the same habits, I talk the same way. And there's things that like you don't want to be your dad, you know, you don't want to be like my dad was very uh he just had a really awkward way of explaining things where I was just like, just get to the point, tell me, and it would frustrate the heck out of me. And he was trying to be an expert in everything. And it's like, I don't have time for that. But it was like that was a very important aspect for my learning because I was just like when people go, my peers, when I watch other consultants practice, it drives me nuts when they overtalk the audience, when they want to maintain a third wall that's their
Hmm.
expertise. And
Hmm.
it's like you're not helping the audience understand what's going on, and you're not helping yourself. And we're
Yeah.
trained to be experts, right? You go to grad school or you go to undergrad, you learn
Yeah.
something, and then you get really, really excited about, I want to be a toe doctor. Then you go off to toe doctor school, right? And you want to brag about, I've just invested $150,000 into my brain to be the expert on toes. Well, the audience doesn't understand that. They just want to know, what does it matter with it? My toes kind of looking weird, you know?
Hmm.
Um, cities are no different. So when you sit with your doctor and they start talking gibberish and you're just like, I have no idea what you just said. And then they talk to you like a regular person, all of a sudden there's an understanding.
Yeah. There's a
So
connection.
yeah. So what I've learned from back again, I'll keep on going back to Liz and Andreas because
Hmm.
they were explaining cities to us in architecture school. Now their methodology was different. They were trying to wake us up because at that time in the 80s and early 90s at University of Miami, a lot of my classmates were out designing suburbia in Kendall and other parts of Dade County. And it's really hard to teach architecture to a student who's already getting paid more than the professors, right? Who's
Yeah.
practicing more than the professors. And so the attitude was, could we just teach them some basics so they don't screw up the planet? Like that neighborhoods should be walkable and stuff like that. And they were also bringing their zoning codes that they were the creation of the form-based codes. They were bringing those into the architecture studios. And, you know, architects trained as one. We're kind of coddled as little gods that we're like, oh, we're so creative, you're awesome. And if you put a zoning code in front of an architecture student, it's like giving them an aneurysm because all of a sudden it's just like, wait, there's rules. I got to follow rules. But that's life, you know? But they were trying to figure out what's the minimal that they could do from a zoning code standpoint that would actually create good design. So
Hmm.
don't let the zoning get in the way. So that's where form-based codes came from. And, you know, my class, several classes before and after mine, were sort of the guinea pigs of how could we break, because students don't want to follow rules. So we'll find every way to break their code and get through that. But that was like teaching us the real world and how it operates. I might have just strayed away from your question. Am
Yeah.
I doing all right?
You're doing great. We really appreciate this. If you can just touch a little bit more on how the cities can learn from the whole DNA, the young cities, how how we can learn from, from the older cities.
Sure, sure. Um, if- Flipping over 180 degrees to Asheville, North
Hmm.
Carolina. Asheville achieved the highest debt per capita of the entire United States in 1930. And when the Depression hit, the city just mothballed itself. Now, one of the things that was kind of unique to Asheville is they chose to not pay off their debt, or sorry, they chose not to take federal debt relief in the
Okay.
in the 30s. A lot of southern cities did. Asheville didn't, and they chose to pay off the debt. It took up till 1976 to pay off that debt. So because we were in debt so much, we couldn't do urban renewal programs or any of that other stuff. We couldn't bond out things because we had bad credit rating.
Hmm.
So the silver lining in this is that you have all these buildings just sitting around fallow, just kind of hanging out. The community, back to DNA, the community had sort of a we're not urban attitude, because by the time, flash forward to the 90s, um, that they're just like, look, this didn't work. It was a failed experiment, this downtown stuff.
Hmm.
Everybody likes suburbia. We're suburban now. Americans love good cars. I mean, we just bought into this car culture stuff that's been basically, we've been inoculated with it since we're born. I mean, if you look at TV, it
Yeah.
just every other commercial is a car ad. It's like it's we're being force fed this kind of marketing that this is the only way
Yeah.
to get around. Back to Miami for a second. I remember Teofilo Victoria at one of the history of architecture classes, fiddling around with the lights in the conference room and just kind of talking to himself. He's like very poetic. And at one point he just blurts out, like, if you see a citizen on the sidewalk in Miami, you think that there's some poor soul that is just uh, indolent and can't afford a car, and then we look down upon them. And it was just like, wow, it was such a judgment statement, but it was like kind of a very true statement
Yeah.
of the pedestrian is not a real person. Now, the Miami back then is very different from the Miami today, but still, when you're driving down US 1, it's like you're just in your car doing your thing, and that person on the street is like beneath you. It's like, why
Hmm.
why are they there? They're just in my way. And it's just it's amazing. But anyway, sorry, non
No,
sequitur there. But
please.
coming back
Yeah.
to Asheville, we developed this our community developed this attitude of not being urban. Now, I had the great good fortune of working for this guy's company. Julian Price started this company called Public Interest Projects that's headed by Pat Whalen. So it's a real estate development company using Julian's wealth to fix buildings and startup businesses. So it's like that thing that you want to have in a city, which is somebody rehabbing buildings and putting some new lifeblood into businesses. But it's pretty typical stuff. Is you take this building and you fix it up. Now, Pat Whalen, who was my boss at the time, who's actually still behind this wall is their office, and we're still in there.
Wow.
Um, it's we're a startup of his company, but Pat's a numbers guy, and it's all data, data, data. Now, for me, it's in architecture world, we're not trained in numbers. We're told about city design. We talk about zoning codes, but that's as far as we go. A real estate developer will hire us. So as architects, we just sit there twiddling our thumbs, waiting for some developer to hire us. Meanwhile, when we go around cities, millions of buildings are popping out of our heads everywhere we go. We're just like, oh, there should be something over here. We're constantly redesigning the city in our brain, which is a blessing and a curse. But what Pat did that was interesting, actually, let me put a pin in this and come back to this.
Okay.
After graduation, um, I went and got a master's of urban design. And one of the things at Harvard that they make you do is a real estate development course. So I was like, fine, whatever, I've got to get this out of the way. I took a real estate development course as a prerequisite. And then I was like, wait a minute, this is kind of easy. It's just, well, not totally easy, but it's just numbers. It's a mathematical formula to make a building work. You have to be able to pay for it and the rent. And they walked us through how a real estate pro forma works. And so I was
Hmm.
like, I got to do more of this. So I started I basically minored in real estate development. And then I went off and worked in real estate development in uh, John Hancock Real Estate Investment Group in Boston. So this was
Okay.
a large real estate company that just buys up buildings around the country. We had like $4 billion worth of real estate across the country. Um, and it was sort of mind blowing to me how they look at real estate, how versus how you and I would look at real estate. We look at place. Like, what is this
Yeah.
place like? What's it? How do kids get around? How does an 80-year-old get around? Where do you find your food? It's like that's how cities are designed at a human level. For them, it's just commodities. So you just buy an office building. And I remember talking to my boss there. His name is Curtis Davis. Awesome man. And I was in the architect's pool. So we would go and look at the buildings and figure out how they were falling apart and how to fix them, like mechanics in a car lot or something. And I remember talking with one of the finance officers who managed one of the buildings. And I said to him, I'm like, Tom, and I held up a picture of a building that we owned in Topeka, and I held up a picture of a building that we owned in Tacoma. And I said, here are two buildings. Do
Hmm.
you notice anything different about these buildings? And he points at one and goes, well, that one's got a cash flow of blah, 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 and an NOI of blah, 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 and a lease up rate of 85%. This one's got a cash flow of blah, 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 an NOI of this, and a lease up. I'm like, no, 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 no. I don't want to know the stats. I want you to look at the pictures and tell me what the difference is in these buildings. He's like, what are you getting at? I'm like, they're the same damn building.
Yeah.
We own the same office building in Topeka and the same office building in Tacoma. Do you realize these buildings fall apart differently? Like they're in totally different climates. So we're spending $100 million fixing these buildings. Meanwhile, I'm making like $15 an hour. I'm like, that's a lot of money. And it's just like, why are we doing this? And it's just kind of like, why do you buy junk? And he couldn't see that, because as far as we're concerned, it's cash flowing. It's
Yeah.
just money's going in and money's coming out. And they held these buildings. And again, they're not criminal. It's just that this is the way that real estate finance works. You buy a building, you operate it for a little while, you sell it to somebody else once you want to. Buy low, sell high, wait for the real estate market to change. That's simple.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of blown away. I was like, wait a minute. I went to architecture school. I'm trained as an artist, and you're supposed to be the finance expert, and your brain only goes as far as the cash flow sheet. I was like, wow, this is mind blowing to me. Like
Yeah.
this is how the world works. And I was like, this is crazy.
So,
Anyway, Flash,
mhm.
that's
Please,
that's
please.
my aha moment. It's like if we don't know this, you're flying blind. Like why? How could you criticize a city? How could you design a community if you don't know how the money works?
Yeah.
Like, would you expect if how would you, okay, let's put it a different way. Would you respect a judge at a figure skating contest if you were a figure skater? You spend your entire life figure skating. You're out there at 6 in the morning every single day, putting hours into figure skate, and then you go through a routine, and the judge who's sitting outside the rink has never put on a pair of skates. How would you
No
feel
way.
about that? You would be pissed. And so you talk to anybody. I used to work in government. Talk
Mhm.
talk to people who work in government. Have they ever built a building? So you're
Probably
the
not.
judge
Yeah.
of the building? Yeah, it's like hello. And additionally, for the developer out there, you've never worked in government. You even understand the chaos of what it is inside city government. It's like this stuff. You've got some politician comes in, they're like, "We're in a clean house." Like no business can operate that way. You can't just like I can't walk into my office one day and just go, today we're gonna make hot dogs. It's like everybody would have a bunch of basket cases down there. It's like, but that's how government operates. We're gonna be doing this today, and then all of a sudden somebody wins a popularity contest and you completely change your mind. That's kind of
Yeah.
nutty. So until we identify these things, until we start talking about it, we're not going to be dealing with the problem. We're only dealing with the symptoms, you know? So when I was working with Pat, one of the things that he did that was kind of amazing is this is one of the buildings that he rehabbed. Ground floor retail, second floor office, upper stories are residential. So he made a mixed use building. The city did the streetscape, and the way that he was presenting it was, he got accused of being subsidized by some other property owners because the city built the sidewalk in front of his building. And he's like, well, that's great. I didn't pay for that. So thank you for the garbage can, the bike rack, two benches, and the street tree. But in renovating the building, it went from $300,000 of value to $11 million of value. So that's what a developer does. They put
Yeah.
value into a property. Well, the taxes that are coming off this property just shot up 3,500%. So wouldn't you love a 401k plan or a Christmas savings fund that grew by 3,500%. If you put a buck in, it grew out
Definitely.
3,000. That sounds freaking awesome,
Yeah.
you know? And it was amazing, like the pushback that he got. Now I'm watching this all go down. I'm like, this is awesome. Like that's a hell of a way to talk about rehab. It's like, yes, we put money in, but you get money too, you know? And
Yeah.
that was his way of trying to educate the government that yes, developers are not evil. You can actually do the right thing. And then people would push back at him and say, well, that's cute, Pat, but there's this Walmart that's $20 million, that's double your building. And what was brilliant about what Pat did is he goes, well, that's fine, but it's, apples and oranges from a land use perspective. So the Walmart takes up 34 acres versus the Walmart at 0.2. So when you break the tax bill down per acre, his building's 1,000 times more productive.
Yeah.
Um, that's pretty cool. And then again, people, they're like, well, we're doing a Walmart for the retail taxes. All right, let's look at it. So this beauty salon, furniture store, and a tattoo shop is, what is that? Double the productivity of a Walmart from a retail standpoint. We also have residents and more jobs. So I was watching Pat do this, and I was like, this is it. This is all people need to know. So um, and I don't know if you ever heard of this thing
Yeah.
called a recession that happened.
I'm sure we
Um,
all have.
yeah, so the
Yeah.
recession went on in 2009. I was, we weren't really doing much here. This was sort of this is what we did in Asheville here. Like, well, this was this constant education process with our community. In Asheville, we have I like to say we have two sides, two kinds of people in Asheville. We've got hippies and rednecks and nothing in between. There's very little middle ground, and it's very polarized. And we're seeing this nationally with politics. It's like you got to belong to a camp, and it's just like you can't talk to each other. It's like people are out over here. So Pat was trying to make this argument on the left and the right. On the left, because we're real estate development, all developers are evil. You get people in the left. Developers are money bags. They're all rapacious scumbags and killing the planet. It's like, I'm sorry, do you live in a bush? Like somebody built your house, right?
Yeah.
Um, and then on the right, they kind of misconstrue new development is positive development. That if it's new, it's good.
Mhm.
That we should have independent property rights. Don't tell me what to do with. We can't have zoning. All that. That's the right side, and they don't know. You would think of them being fiscally conservative, that they would do the math, but they don't. No one does. So this is the simple math right here. I took this little bit right here, the Walmart versus the old pennies, to Smart Growth America. Had this conference back in the late 2000s called this is this National Smart Growth Conference in Seattle. And I started this presentation with a quote from Mark Twain, which said, "A person who won't read has no advantage over one who can't read."
It's a great
Right?
quote.
A person who won't read has no advantage over one who can't read. And I stood in front of the audience and I said, look, we're all interested in smart growth and walkability and affordable housing and parks and greenways. So who here, and I had my hand in the air, I said, who here has read your local tax assessment policies to understand how the cash flow operates in the city? And I was expecting, it's a planning conference. I was expecting there's always a couple of like infectious nerds that are there.
Hmm.
There's like, oh yeah, I've read the code. No
Yeah.
one, no one put their hand up. And I was like, what the hell?
Yeah.
And I got mad. I'm like, you need to do this. Steal
Yeah.
this math right here. Do this. Here's the chart. This is it. This is how hard it is. That was 2009. Here we are in 2023. And I just figured people would just steal it and go with it. But people started hiring us. And like, that's how Urban 3 got started. I was like, all right, well, I guess we'll do it for you.
That's
I mean,
awesome.
it's not that complicated, but I don't know if it's just people have habits or what. And folks say to me, they're like, well, that's at first they would say this is a gimmick, that this whole per acre thing. I'm like, is miles per gallon a gimmick? You say miles
Definitely
per
not.
gallon, not miles per tank. So
Yeah.
it's just habits. People have habits. Anyway,
Yeah.
I've talked a lot on this. I don't know
No,
if I've
please.
gotten off.
No, this is why you're on. I'm sure the audience is really appreciating it. This is one of my favorite parts about what you present and how you present the actual apples to apples, comparison, and how it shows that municipalities actually benefit from walkable urbanism. And, it really does increase their tax base. And I love how you're able to, show very simply through visualizations how it benefits the municipality as well as the developer. I love how you have a bunch of different quotes, right? And one of the ones, like the Mark Twain one, was one of my favorites that you bring up in your presentations. And I like how you also say that we can change our tax system and tax code, but we gotta read. We've gotta use
Yeah.
the data. We've gotta present it, and data is the force. So if you can please continue talking about that, how we can be, instead of just being a victim of the math, how we can be part of the math and truly, make these changes happen in our own communities.
Yeah, part of this is it's very destabilizing to just go full bore into how messed up the system is.
Mm-hmm.
And again, back to, by the way, for the podcast audience that's listening, I have the quote up right now from Mark Twain.
Yeah.
It's a slide, but what I find that the most powerful aspect of our work is you have to have empathy for the audience, and you have to work with them where they're at. And that's, again, back to Liz,
Mm-hmm.
watching how they were explaining in the structure that she set up inside the School of Architecture. I mean, that's pretty punk to go into an architecture school and infuse it with city planning and not call it city planning.
Yeah.
And the planners back then, and for a long time, long time, fought new urbanism. And it's kind of unforgivable. You have a bunch of architects and landscape architects in the early 90s show up at planning conferences. And I remember when I was in the studios, Andreas was running around with this fax
Mm-hmm.
back then. And for the millennials and younger, a fax is a piece of paper that gets transmitted through a little computer and shows up in an office at a printer. So it's super old
Those are
school email.
extinct. Yeah, those are
Yeah.
extinct nowadays.
But he had this fax of somebody had leaked to him. Some people at the APA were trying to figure out how to keep him from showing up at APA conferences, not as a presenter, just like he would just crash the conference and harass people. And, he was right. But he was curious, he wanted to know, how is it? And, the story that I had heard is during Q&A, he stood before this panel of planners that were, pissing and moaning about sprawl. And he said, you have zoning codes. So you have the law on your side as a planner. You have comprehensive plans. So you have guiding documents of principles. You have a process that you control called a planning process and the planning commission and everything else. You have order, and you have an entire staff of city planners, bigger than my office at DPZ. And you can't stop sprawl. Can we now acknowledge the fact that sprawl is 100% planned by your comprehensive plans, by your zoning codes, by your process, and by your staff?
Oh yeah.
And incredibly offensive, but very, 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 very true. So again, back to the judge. You've got the judges in the process that have never worn skates trying to control the process. And that was the early days of the Congress for New Urbanism. It wasn't just him. It was Polyzoides. It was Calthorpe. There were other people involved. Elizabeth Moule. I mean, you can pull the history of the CNU
Yeah.
and see these people. And they were frustrated because they're like, there's got to be a different way to talk about this stuff. But because they were designers, and I'm put air quotes around that, designers
Mm-hmm.
aren't allowed to talk about planning because planners see designers as being bullies or something like that, because we're telling people what's good design and bad design. It's like, well, no, we understand what good design and bad design is,
Yeah, you
period.
guys are
We're
wired
trained in
that
that.
way. Yeah, you guys are
Yeah, it's
wired
like,
that
come
way.
on now. Are you gonna, like, when your doctor gives you some advice, are you gonna say, well, that's your call?
Yeah.
That's, you're making a statement. Of course, you'd expect the professional to make a statement like that. So I don't, I have very little patience for planners that complain about design and have absolutely no design experience. They have policy experience, they talk about laws, but they have no idea about design. And yet a zoning code is a design manual. Let's put away the form-based code for a second. Let's just go to a straight up Euclidean zoning code. It's
Yeah,
going to have a side setback. It's going to have a front setback. It's going to have a building height. Those are all design principles. So
definitely.
anyway, it was pretty from 19, I think that was like 92, 91 was the first CNU.
Yeah, 92,
So
93.
think
Yeah.
about that from 93, and just the history is there, folks. Go on the APA website, the American Planning Association website, and figure out when they created their first new urbanism chapter. It's not even a rule for them. It's like a fan club. Y'all want to talk
Hmm.
about new urbanism? Great. We'll set up a little room for you. I'm an APA member. I am a member of that organization, and it drives me nuts that's how they treat design. Still to this day, the year 2022, we're almost 2023, and
Yeah.
this is still going on. It's
Yeah.
like, come on now. If that institution can't move, it needs to understand that it's obsolete. Um,
Definitely. The suburban bias is just extremely baked into the system,
well, it's not.
as you alluded to.
I'm not. In all of our work, we don't judge people for that. It's like, I don't care if you want to do a Walmart, knock yourself out. I just want you to
Yeah.
be conscious of the cost and to
Yeah.
realize that the average Walmart consumes more in police services than it pays in property taxes. If that's what you want, I don't care. I don't care if you eat pizza every single day. I just think you should be looking at the fat content and make sure, don't come complaining to me when you're having a heart attack. Don't say,
Yeah.
oh, how did I have this heart attack? It's like, you're eating pizza every damn day. I
Yeah.
love
And not
pizza.
working
We
out.
all do. Yeah, exactly. It's like, come on now.
Yeah.
And so and that's the whole thing, is we're dealing with humans in a human environment. Be human about it. Humans make mistakes. That's cool. But if humans are unconscious about the rules, if humans don't understand the connections, then it's on us as professionals, not the citizens.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Exactly.
I'm gonna get off my soapbox on that. But it's this is what I've learned from Liz, is you've got to reach people where they're at.
Yeah.
It's our job as professionals to explain this stuff. So when we do it, we try to do it. I'm a visual guy, so I have to show pictures, but
Definitely.
we'll go full force into people's biases and just be curious about it. It's like, all right, let's talk about real estate. So this is a map of my entire county, the way that people typically talk about real estate. So this is we use Esri software,
Hmm.
awesome company. It's just software that's like a Ferrari. It does amazing stuff, but it's basically the platform that all cities operate on this software to maintain parcels. So we just use their software. We're like, here you go. Non-taxables in gray. So these shows you the big parks that we have in our county, that are in gray. Low value is in green, and high
Hmm.
value is purple. So you see low value up here on the north side by Mount Mitchell. It's out in the country area. And then here you have this big purple splotch in the middle of the county. It's called the Biltmore Estate. The Biltmore Estate is America's largest house. It was built by George Vanderbilt, and it's worth $100 million for one house. Cool. Um, when people just stop there and they're like, that's $100 million house, and they talk about it with this kind of confidence and pride about it, to me, it's like, well, let's be fair. It's 180,000 square foot house sitting on an 8,000 acre parcel. Of course, it's going to be valuable. So rather than total value, let's do value per acre to understand productivity. And that changes the map. So now we can start to see productivity. But the thing is, when I talk to map people, they get this. And I'm like, look, you got to talk to the humans that are in the audience. They're not all map people. So show it to them. So this is the whole map in 3D. So if you just look at the key on the left over here, to go from red, actually, let's go back one. To go from
Yeah.
red to purple, you're going from 6 million to 20 million. Those are
Huge
numbers.
difference.
That's a huge difference. But it's
Yeah.
like, when you don't get that emotional pull when you look at this
Hmm.
map. You're just like, okay, that's information. But when you see it this way, you can see what it means to go from red to purple.
Yeah. It's
It's a
easier to
huge step
visualize.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for the audio audience, it's like going from the second story to the 85th story is a jump
Hmm.
in a building. And so when I talk to the audience, it's like I'm talking knowing that there's people out in Fairview that have an attitude against the city, the same way that people in West Dade have an
Hmm.
attitude against Miami.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's the downtown part. I'm not, that's not the problem. That's not causing congestion. That's not making us broke. or worse, they'll blame the downtown as being expensive because they'll see in the newspaper that, you know, a streetscape project in downtown Miami cost $12 million a mile. And they're just
Hmm.
like, the hell, my money's going down there, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, no, they're actually shoveling money out of the downtown. And
Yeah.
that fertile soil that's in the downtown needs to be fed. You can't just, you got to feed your golden goose. You can't just make pate out of it. So this shows them that. Now, also, I'd like to point out Black Mountain, which is about 9 miles to the east. You can see its little downtown popping up as well.
Yeah.
And now remember, we're all county taxpayers, so we're all paying the same county millage rate. We're all paying the same tax load. So it's 6 mils. So think of a 6 millimeter thick blanket dropped on this whole model. Where's the county getting its money? Actually, since we're talking to a Miami audience, let's go ahead and pull up Miami.
Oh, yes. I was looking forward to this part.
We've done some work and we're working in Palm Beach County right now, and we just started a project in Broward. Here's the Miami model. We did this to show the consequences of climate change, but this is the tax productivity model of Dade County, a portion of Dade County. You can only see what's on the screen. But look at how potent Miami Beach is. It's sort of ridiculous. Actually more potent than Fisher Island. You can see the island, Fisher Island, which is, you know, crushing it.
Yeah.
You can kind of spot where where the Grove is right here, and you know, the Brickell area. Coral Gables is kind of like right in about here.
Yep.
This is surprising. This looks like it's the Kendall area because you have Kendall Drive going out east-west here, but you can see how flat the majority of the model is, where people live in single family housing because it's just not that productive. So the American city is dependent on the urban environment to cover the cost of suburbia, period. It's been that way since the 20s. This is the way that we've set up policies to fuel that growth and just put steroids into it after World War II with the creation of all the federal highways. So if you look west in Dade County, those areas wouldn't have grown be it not for these big federal highways that go north south through it. And you all know it. That's how you travel around.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
but we went ahead and flooded the model. Now it was kind of funny. I remember talks about climate change when I was in school, and everybody was just like, "Yeah, whatever." And now flash forward, I remember the last time I was in Miami. It's like, "Well, it's raining. You better watch out, or the streets are going to flood." And I was like, "Really? That happens just with rain?" That wasn't like that back then, and that's just within my life. But anyway,
Wow.
this is with 1 foot of sea level change. So we wanted to just wipe out the buildings and vaporize them when they get crushed. So just 1 foot, you're losing close to $200 million worth of real estate. 1 foot is nothing. When you talk about 2 feet, is where it should be like somewhere in the 3 foot range for real climate change. So this is reasonable to assume is going to happen in the next 50 years. You're looking at $10 billion worth of lost value, billion with a B. Now that's just climate change. What happens with climate change and a storm event like a hurricane or a tropical storm or depression that comes through? So just a regular hurricane is going to raise you by about 4 feet, right? A 4 foot sea change. So let's go from 3 to 7. Now, oops, back one. So about $166 billion of lost value. Now, what's interesting about the map, what I love about maps is I would have never assumed, you know, it's like we tend to think, oh, sea level, good luck, Miami Beach, kiss you goodbye. Maybe you should be Venice. You know, it's like we'll talk like that, but look on the west side of Dade County, you're getting water intrusion
Yeah.
in West Dade County. Like that was mind blowing to me. I was like, seriously, that's going to happen? But it wipes out a tremendous amount of real estate. Now, it's not highly valuable the way that the coast is, but it all adds up. You're talking $166 billion of value loss. Now, if you want to put our foot to the floor and say it is reasonable to a direct hit of Dade County with a hurricane, you're going to be talking about 9 feet. So now we're at $252 billion worth of value loss. So here's the question for Dade County residents. Would somebody live in this if this were your future? Would this be an archipelago of islands like the Keys or something like this? and everybody would be
Wow.
like, all right, we could live with this? Or would people just say, screw it, I'm not going to move from Venezuela to Miami, I'm going to move from Venezuela to Orlando? So
Yeah.
once people make those choices, they
Northern.
don't have to move to Dade County. um, and I think, to me, that's the scarier question of to be. And it's, again, this isn't to like be hyperbolic or scare people. It's like, look, you got to talk these things through,
Definitely.
and not just keep on widening highways. It's like Miami should be incredibly vocal about this for the rest of the country, and say we're living with this now, because my people in Miami could remember those days in the 80s and the 90s where they were just sleepwalking through all of this stuff and just going, oh, that'll never happen to us. Now you have it.
Now it's
So
happening. Yeah.
yeah. And I think to me, that's the challenge for Miamians, is like, get out and talk about this stuff, share your experiences for people in, I don't know, Richmond, Virginia, or something like that. It's like people should know what y'all experience,
Yeah.
because
The proof.
it's
The
costly.
proof is in the pudding, pretty much. You know.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and we talked about, let's see if I've got it up here. Um,
Joe, can you touch on this right here? The Color of Us is a great book, and how this ties into everything that we're talking about.
yeah, so I've pulled up here. This is just a little sample. Uh, what happened, actually, let's kind of jump back for a second. We'll come back to Miami here. So in 1934, uh, the federal government, there's a term called redlining. The federal government created these things through the Federal Home Administration, basically a system for changing us as a country into homeowners. It's kind of funny when people talk about the American dream. The American dream is less than 100 years old, basically. In 1934, the passage of the National Housing Act was a direct incentive to give us the ability to become homeowners. So they changed mortgages from 7 years to 30 years, which is a tremendous financial change. It's
Definitely.
kind of mind blowing. We all talk about mortgages as like they're 30 years. I was like, no, they weren't before then. Banks wouldn't lend you money that long because they wanted to get paid back. So the federal government stepped in and said, let's get people to be homeowners. Ironically, they did it because they were freaked out about becoming socialists. So they created a socialized program to put us in housing. Let that wash over you for a second, how ironic that is.
Yeah.
So, and their attitude was, if we can get people to become more homeowners, they'll be less willing to be socialists. Our streets are socialized, our housing is socialized, yet we don't want to be socialist. Okay, whatever. But from 1934 to 1968, they told communities, like, we can't judge you all. So you make a map, and in your map you need to have 4 colors. So if you look on the lower left of this is the key to the 4 colors that you were supposed to apply in your community to be to judge your real estate. So if you're red, you're hazardous. That's the worst. You're not going to get a bank loan. If you're green, that's good. We'll give you a mortgage if you're in a green neighborhood. Blue neighborhood, which is desirable,
Yeah.
not as good as the green, and yellow is declining. Yellow is somewhere in purgatory between red and green, which you can do more local judgment. But hazardous was pretty simple. You were hazardous for basically 2 reasons: whether you were an infiltration of immigrants, or if you were black, or in their words, Negro. So that's
Yeah.
it. You wake up one day, this map exists in your community, and you can't get a mortgage. Now, here's the thing: if you owned your house in that neighborhood and you're already there, you can't sell your house because no one's going to get a mortgage for it. So this is incredibly pernicious, incredibly destructive to communities. And Miami did one here. So this is Miami's red line map. So if y'all want to, for the audio folks, you can go on to Mapping Inequality, is a website maintained by the University of Richmond, and they have all of these maps up, and you can go in and poke around. It's both eye-opening and gut-wrenching at the same time. But here you see Miami's, and this is all pre-highway, so there's no I-95 here. And you can see just downtowns typically aren't there were commercial districts. There was nobody really living there. The redlining was done for primarily single family detached housing. And you see North Miami, downtown Miami, west of US 1, is redlined. I-95. Remember, this went on from 1934 to 1968. 1968, the federal government steps in and says, this is unconstitutional. You can't do this to people. Now, at that point, you've had 30 years of draining the economic regeneration of a community. It's basically like trapped in time in 1930, and people can't get a second mortgage. They can't improve their houses. So when they come forward to do the highways, they're like, where's the cheap real estate? Let's just go ahead and buy that. And they just plowed the highway right through these neighborhoods. So this is intentional. This is intentional to take the money away from these neighborhoods, and it was an intentional act to run the highways through those communities. And you can see Coral Gables down here in green. Here's Coral Gables in green and blue. So just, I'll show you what one of the sheets looks like. Let's go into the Black Grove. Here it is. This is the actual document on the left here, and you'll note that they say this is the Negro section of Miami, right there on the chart. Foreign-born families, none. Yet Negro population, yes, 90% Negro population. You'll see that right there on the right of the slide. And then with detrimental influences, so it's like you're calling this hazardous, yet they say right here, none from a Negro standpoint. It's like the Black people are happy. And it's just like, so why are you calling this hazardous? It's because they're Black. So the other thing is, when you look at the data from 1929 and 1938, the prices have been growing in value. So even though this is supposed to be hazardous, this is supposed to be declining, not from a number standpoint, the data shows
going
that.
up.
And from a rent standpoint, it's also going up even faster. So not only people are want to build in this neighborhood, they also want to rent in that neighborhood. So why is this hazardous? And this is another neighborhood. This is Coral Gables. So let's see how this is judged. So right there, this includes the largest and best developed section of Coral Gables, which is the northern part of just around downtown, western part of downtown. Foreign-born families, 10% Latino, Negro population, none. They gave it a grade A in Coral Gables. Now, if you look at the numbers, it is growing in value there and there, but it's not growing as fast as the Black Grove. And this kind of like dawned on me. I was like, wait a minute, let's just look at these for a second. We'll look at Coral Gables, we'll look at the Black Grove because they're kind of next to each other. Also, the coast area of Coral Gables there that's blue. And then let's look at the Black neighborhoods north of downtown, as well as Bay Shores, which is an exclusive neighborhood that's listed as green. When you chart these out, this is a chart showing the green line neighborhoods against the red line neighborhoods and the value growth from 29 to 38. So even though they've been punitively hit in 1934, check this out. The red line neighborhoods are actually more valuable and growing in wealth faster than the green line neighborhoods. So why did you do this to these people? And this is, I think we need to have an honest adult conversation about this, because this is causing problems in communities, even though we stopped doing it in 1968. So we were doing Kansas City, Kansas. This is Kansas productivity model. And they asked us to look at redlining. They're like, would you look at it? I'm like, yeah, hell yeah, it's happening right here. You can see just when you cross one road, this is like, it was a bird in Coral Gables. It's like when you cross one road, it flattens out. And you see how it's orange on one side of the road, yellow on the other. Well, it's like, all right, let's look at your red line map. So that avenue is called Troost Avenue. We dropped Troost Avenue on a red line map, and sure enough, east of Troost, it's heavily redlined. Go figure. We tend to think like we're not doing this. It wasn't us. It was these past people. They're racist. They're bad. So going back and tapestrying the red line map on their model and color coding it based on the red line colors, you can see the haircut every district takes from the green line neighborhood at about $2 million an acre down to 1.4 million for blue, down to 300,000 for yellow, and down to about 175,000 for red. So huge value problems in today's world. I think this is going to be this generation's problem that we have to talk about. And I'll just close with one more piece, because this is just a tip of the iceberg. It's worse than this, way worse than this. And I'll show you an example. our city, our city and our county adopted reparations because we had a history of redlining in Asheville. Um, and so Ori Baber, who's an analyst here, amazing data scientist, he did this series of analytics. So here's our race. When you look at the city of Asheville, that you'll notice like Asheville kind of curves around this big kind of bubble called, which is where the Biltmore Estate is. So we don't own the Biltmore Estate; it's not part of the city. It's its own little territory, if you will.
Mhm.
What a lot of people don't realize is that adjacent to the Vanderbilt mansion, the Vanderbilts built a subdivision that's kind of like Coral Gables on steroids without commercial. And it's just this huge golf course subdivision, basically. Very, very wealthy homes, prominent homes. People like Sidney Powell, who's Donald Trump's former attorney. She lives there or used to live there. And then if you cross Hendersonville Road, which is our US one, if you will, east of that is Shiloh, which is a Black neighborhood. This is a guy I know, Reggie Harrell. This is Reggie's house. Nothing to write home about. It's a vernacular architecture. It's an old 1920s building, and not exactly high end living here. When you look at Sydney's house, even her house is not like some huge mansion. It's just a ranch burger on a big parcel. So putting the two houses side by side and looking at the data, this plays out the land value per acre. So what the value of the parcel is plays out the way that you'd expect it. Sydney's house is worth $400,000 an acre versus Reggie's at about 180,000. When you look at the building value per square foot, however, this is where you start to see some of the problems.
Yeah.
And Reggie's house is valued at $125 a square foot. Sydney's is 107. So I asked the assessor, I said, Keith, can you explain this to me? And he said, well, you're not being fair because she's got bigger square foot. I'm like, this isn't like going to Costco and buying toilet paper. Buying by the bulk works for that. It doesn't work for architecture. The more expensive the more square footage you build, the more expensive it is. Plus, she's got 4 bathrooms, and Reggie's only got 1. So
Yeah.
how are you, again, biases? People have she just operated that was normal, and I was like, no. The result is Reggie's neighborhood is paying about $1,000 an acre more in taxes than Sydney's neighborhood. So even though he's of lower wealth, of lower means, he's paying more taxes to the county. How is that fair? And then secondly, in North Carolina, we do reassessments every 4 years. So from last assessment to this assessment, Reggie's house has gone up 266%, and Sydney's is only going up 126. Yet I know that she's renovated her property and Reggie hasn't. So how is this happening? And again, there's biases that are in the system, and the way that it works out. And this is going on in Dade County. That the way that the mathematics works, if you buy a house in my county for $225,000, it gets assessed at 225. If you buy a house of lower value than 225, it gets a higher than purchase price assessment, which is against the law. And if you buy a house greater value than 225, it gets a little discount in the system, which is a violation of the law. The law says your taxable value should be your market value, period. We don't have the rules that you guys have in Florida with the homeowners exemptions or anything
Yeah.
complicated. But this is how it works. And it's really simple. What's going on, though, however, is we're overtaxing the poor and undertaxing the rich to an overcharge of about $1 million and undercharge of $6 million ish. So you're looking at about a $6.9 million subsidy baked into the system, which is, I call it welfare. We're just giving money to rich people who should be
Yeah.
paying their fair share of taxes. And again, it's not their fault, but this is in the system, and we should all be paying this. If they're going to get a 10% discount or a 20% discount, everybody should get a 20% discount. Let's just be honest about it. Fair and equal across the system. Um,
Agreed.
Anyhow, we're currently
Yeah.
working this out, and if we did this analysis in Coral Gables, we'd probably be seeing the same thing. This is Reggie's neighborhood, and notice how it's all level to the same height. And what's going on there is what happens in the Grove, that some wealthier person moves into the neighborhood, buys a house, rehabs it, it gains value. And so the assessor goes into Reggie's neighborhood and goes, well, I can't stop gentrification. That's what's going on. When you cross the roadway here and go into the rich neighborhood, Notice how there's two transactions there and none of the value transferred to any of the other parcels. So when a house sells by the golf course in Coral Gables, how is it that no one wants to live next to the golf course? Can you explain that to me? Why is it only affecting those two transactions and not everybody else? Is there no gentrification in the rich neighborhoods? And this is, again, is a bias. You can't practice the law
Yeah.
on one side of the street one way and on the other side of the street a different way. And all this stuff's hiding in plain sight. Seriously, poke around, go grab a property card. This is a 22-acre parcel with a 16,000 square foot house on it, right next to the Blue Ridge Parkway, which would be on the golf courses in Coral Gables or on the waterfront. And so here's this property card from the last 10 years. And this is 2011. And I'll have you read to the audience what the value of the house was in 2011. What does that say?
3.9 million.
Okay, cool. Now, first of all, this is probably a $16 million house, but let's just go ahead and stick with that $3.9 million, right? So they're undervalued considerably, but let's stick with the 3.9 million. Here's 2021. So 10 years later, check out the value.
It's going down to 3 million. Wow.
It lost $1 million of value.
Yeah.
Like, what planet? And this place makes Coral Gables look like Slumtown. I mean, this is the most valuable neighborhood in the entire state. Wow. And it's losing value. So we just pulled it. Like, look, here's all the houses losing value and gaining value. So there are about 278 houses gaining value of about 50 million bucks. But there's 55% of the houses in this community are losing value for a net loss of 40 million bucks. So I've been showing this to our county commissioners. I'm like, look, y'all, this isn't fair. This doesn't follow your reparations resolution. So either throw that out and let's not pretend that we're being equal here.
Yeah.
Or change these policies and be fair. But you can't continue this practice. And they're terrified of doing it. They're chicken. And it's repulsive that I live in this community that they're doing this. And we're going to hold them accountable. And I'm going to talk about this on shows like this and at conferences until the system changes. So yeah, I'll stop there. I'm getting animated.
Yeah. Your passion is evident, and we're extremely thankful for your work, because this is definitely something that's incredibly meaningful to Miami-Dade County, Florida, and the United States. And it starts by these visualizations, by understanding the data, understanding how cities work. And this is something that I really admire you about, and I'm sure the entire CNU is very thankful that you're dedicating your energy to this. So with that, I want to close and say, Joe, it's been an incredible honor to have you on the show. And I hope we can speak again soon, because all this data is incredibly interesting. And just wanted to say, once again, thank you so much from my audience, from myself. Thank you, Joe. This is extremely important, as you know, and I hope everybody, watches this podcast instead of just listens to it, because this was extremely visual. And, like I said, thanks so much. And we will talk very soon.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for providing this out to the world and giving your voice out there and collecting this all up. This isn't easy to do. You know that. Yeah. And yeah, keep it up. And hopefully I'll see you at the CNU.
Yeah, see you at CNU. Thanks so much, Joe. Appreciate it.